Great. First item on our agenda, decoupling stack IDs and compact guarantees.
Uh, that's something I thought it's sort of related to the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago around having like reverse domain namespaces with stars and
Wildcard stacks.
yeah.
I very, very much want to do that idea.
But then I thought about it and it seemed very weird to me that the fact that the stack IDs, which like currently seem to be like io.buildpacks or something, and some organization may want, for example, com.organization name, not something to uniquely identify their stacks. That is coupled with what build packs are compatible with that stack. Um, Now I see mixins as a way of getting around it. Like it allows you to get away from like some add-ons, but the fact that the main compatibility guarantee is still tied to the ID seems weird to me. That the identifier of the stack somehow like is an indication of what it should be compatible with, and then you have this overloaded ID that everyone has to use if they want to use most of the build packs out there, which is like IO build packs, like the Bionic stack. Um, and that's sort of where I'm coming from. That the ID should just be a way of identifying the stack, not what it is compatible with. Um, I don't know what.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. That makes sense to me on some level. At one point, I was floating like using the expanded platform fields in the OCI image for certain types of compatibility, but you need more information. That's what's in there, which is where like mixins or something could come in. I guess to me, rolling compatibility into the ID makes sense on one level because you're sort of saying, maybe ID is the wrong word for it, but you're describing which images are interchangeable with each other and which aren't. It's, I think the idea is that the ID is not supposed to represent a specific stack distribution, but it's supposed to identify a specific stack contract rather than like a distribution. So you're saying this stack is implementing this contract because within a stack ID, whoever owns that stack ID gets to define the meaning of mixins and stuff like that. But I agree with you that it's a little bit awkward the way we're doing it now. I think the strongest evidence that we're not doing it perfectly is that many build packs that could be running on different stacks can't because it's been hard for whatever reason to use the existing identifiers to create cross compatibility.
Because so the reason is that the way stacks are currently named, and I think the spec says that they have to be in this reverse domain namespace thing, is that it enforces a hierarchy of some sort. So let's say even if we were to implement that proposal, which we were talking about earlier, like star stacks, like wildcard stacks for like Linux stacks or Ubuntu stacks, whether it's Bionic or something else, you're still left with the fact that if a build pack says I am compatible with, let's say, anything that supports Debian, for example, like Debian-like things. So you have Debian, you have Ubuntu, and you have some other, I don't know, OS. You still have to individually name them, and they can't I guess you'll have to change the taxonomy each time you discover a common aggregate. So earlier, your aggregation may have been something like Linux, Ubuntu. Now you have to do Linux, Debian-like, then Ubuntu, uh,
Mhm.
which again bothers me that each time someone comes up with a new aggregation, now you have to figure out where you want to put it in that taxonomy of domains. Um, and mixins seem like an easy way out because they're literally just tags. So you could have like a platform mixin, which is like platform Linux, platform whatever, or you can define new sort of prefixes. So you can have like languages supported Python or um, something like that. So that is more uh, easy to compose and to define contracts because then you can just take X, Y, and Z and put them together without assuming there's a hierarchy between them. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. One thing I have been thinking as well is like right now we have you can basically define your own stack ID, and in it you get your own namespace of mixins. Basically, you get to define what mixins mean within that stack ID. Uh, I would like if we could come up with some stack ID or stack ID replacement that for any image out there, it would describe basic shared features like OS architecture, distribution version. And maybe we can leave some room to grow into arbitrary things like distribution flavor, something, right? And then have everybody use one of those stack IDs and move the domain specific stuff into mixins. So you could, if you, we can define some mixins that are like OS packages are like always, if you say package colon something and you specified a distro, it's the package with that name using the package manager of the distro you specified. And then when people want to do other things, they could namespace the mixins. So it'd be like IO Paketo colon something mixin. Like, and that I feel like in some ways would solve a lot of problems because by not allowing definitions of arbitrary stack IDs, we're forcing everyone to have a stack ID that tells us something. So we know when things can be compatible, but then you can still use the mixins to declare a specific requirement that wasn't defined in the spec. I'm curious about Jesse's take because I know Heroku at one point was looking to switch to Ubuntu Bionic, but ended up creating a new Heroku stack ID. So I imagine that from that effort, there's got to be some feedback about how the current process has been awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's mostly around Buildpack authors currently like knowing what's available and what's not. Like mix-ins weren't a thing really for being able to do some of that. I don't think we're against it. We just haven't like we did explore it and we did try to get to like Bionic for Heroku 18, but it did present some challenges as far as like compatibility. And yeah, wasn't there weren't major hurdles that I remember. I think we probably could get there for Focal for sure, especially when mixins are there. I think with stack packs we could probably attempt this again and maybe get on a common stack between Potato and Roku.
I wonder if in the beginning, maybe we worried a little bit too much about absolutely preventing anyone from putting a build pack on a stack it couldn't run on, because we have these mechanisms that could prevent it now, right? But I know on the Paketo side, there are build packs that only exist on our full builder because they, in reality, require mixins. But I don't think the build pack TOML actually declares those requirements. Like people just pull down that builder or read the docs that say use this build pack with that builder. And of all the things, all the many growing pains we've run into as both of these projects grow, that actually hasn't been one of them. I've never come across a situation where someone is confused because they're trying to run this build pack on the wrong stack. Not that we shouldn't actually fill in that data to make a world where people can more easily mix and match things. But I think we tried really hard to create a system where no one could make that mistake. And in the process, we made it so unapproachable that things ended up not compatible by default in a lot of cases.
Because the thing I'm getting at is that it makes build pack reusability really hard. Like if someone wants to reuse a build pack, even if they're sharing almost all of the code, they still have to like create something new, create a new build pack TOML key, define a bunch of things when they are literally just pulling down the same code. And I think with like once there is something like stack packs or something like that, which allow you to specify these are my requirements, I think a lot of these concerns would be alleviated, and we wouldn't need like like the stack ID being the compatibility guarantee, I guess, and rather it could be just a system of requirements and provisions similar to what we have with different build packs, but the build pack would say that before I run detect or build, I require something else. I don't know.
One of the things I'm looking up right now is the I'm trying to find the platform section that I thought would be in the OCI spec, and that's implemented by GGCR, and like what fields are there to figure out whether like we could actually just use these OCI fields instead of stack IDs.
So
See, I think for me, there's still something worth having. I guess you want to call it a namespace, right? Instead of an ID or something like that. But something that represents that the mixins, right, which I kind of find synonymous to like labels on resources and stuff like that, is that that definition of what these labels are could change between, this image and this other image, right? And I think if we go too far in one direction where like compatibility is defined by something else, right? Like all these other parameters of what the platform is, right? Like the architecture, the Linux distribution, and all this other stuff. Like we probably still want a way to be able to say, okay, these mixins, right? These labels mean this, but they don't, they don't mean the exact same thing if you're talking about this other combination, right? Or this other namespace or domain. So I guess maybe like I know it was brought up at some point, and I think it was the idea that Buildpacks could support multiple stacks and define their compatibility with multiple stacks. That's not a thing that's possible right now, right? Like they could have the any stack,
No,
You can define multiple specifics. You can define the any stack. We're talking about having wildcard stacks, which I feel like would be a big improvement over what we have now. But as Sam is pointing out, maybe it's not perfect.
So,
I do wonder if, like maybe we don't use the actual platform field in the OCI spec, but if we created IO Buildpacks stack IDs that included all of the same elements and you could stick wildcards in ones that you could support any of, like would that sort of like be a nice combo where it's reusing known concepts but also still available in one label?
And that would be like per the namespace of IO build packs, right? Like we would still be defining that namespace only, so that then somebody like, let's say Red Hat, right, could define the way that their mixins operate and how their wildcards, right, or like subsets in the namespace could operate. Is that more or less what you were thinking, Emily?
I guess as soon as like if we did that, that would be fine. It'd be an improvement over what we have now. But I would love if everyone had to pick a stack ID that wasn't totally defined by them. Because I feel like the problem you end up in as a build pack author is that it's very hard to combine build packs from different places together. If I'm like, oh, I want almost everything that's being done here, but I'd like this one, function add-on, it just doesn't work. And then you have to PR to add in your stack ID, but the mix-in namespace is totally different. This is very difficult, actually. If the build pack author was designing for a different stack, it by default won't work on your stack, and trying to get it to work is a little bit ugly in some ways. Like, does Google want to merge in my PR that says it works in the Paketo stack? Like, I don't know.
which is why I think I get the fact that you want mixins to have a specific meaning based on the namespace, but why not push that down to the mixin itself? What Emily was suggesting, which is like you have a prefix with whatever and then colon the mixin name. So you can still what this gives you is having multiple mixins from multiple namespaces be part of the stack rather than once you choose an umbrella, then all the mixins have to be from that namespace. Whereas in this sort of idea, each mixin can say that I'm from this namespace and this is the mixin name, but you can still get mixins from different places together.
Yeah, I think my concern is really just overlap, right? Or conflict of meaning of the mixins. But I think that's where maybe something more concrete of a proposal would shed some light on what that would really look like and what the drawbacks would be. Because again, I'm coming from like the resource cloud management aspect of things, right? Where mixins are labels, and labels, like the individual that defines how labels are structured, right? And what they mean is more or less kind of defined by the operator, right? By the, within that context, within that domain, right? And not so much by everybody agreeing that, hey, this is what we're gonna set this to be. Because then otherwise they would just be fields, right? They wouldn't be arbitrary labels or mixins.
You're right that there is a problem there, where if we say unnamespaced mixin names are the corresponding package and the package manager for the distro, and I'm a build pack that says I support any Linux, which mixin names am I going to write down that I require? Because they, could result to different things for different distros.
I say, right, like different distros have different dependency package names within them.
I think you can't add. I think it's true that you can't add a mixin requirement when you're saying you work on any stack, right? Like the total wildcard stack that we support. Like maybe you could do that if you're using any wildcard in the stack, or we could be more specific about it. It's like only if you've gone up to a distro, then you can have mix-ins, but you can't otherwise. It gets a little awkward though, right?
I think this might also be something that the registry could help with. So currently we show build packs, but if we could aggregate them by the stacks or the mix-ins they're compatible with, or list out all the mix-ins from the build packs and say that, okay, mix-in XYZ has so many build packs, then you could at least have some reference as what other people are using to indicate compatibility rather than inventing your own new thing. So it's not direct, like you're not directly saying that this is the definition of something, but it's definition by the people who are using it or implementing it. So if 5 build packs say that I'm compatible with Mixin, uh, Debian Python 3, then you know that if you want to be compatible with Python 3, that was as a that was distributed as a Debian package, then you can define that mixin. So maybe it's also the lack of information that people don't know how many build packs use the stack ID or how many build packs depend on a certain mixin that forces them to be very restrictive. Um, or they might choose a stack ID that at first they thought, okay, like I'll invent my own thing. But if they could see that all of these build packs like support the stack ID and these are the build packs I want to use, then as an operator, you can say that this is the stack ID I want for my, that I want to couple my run and build images with. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it would help me as an operator to decide which stack ID I should go with. Because
I think it's weird that we just defined Bionic in the project, but also just in RFC and didn't like produce a document that's more discoverable or a stacks repo. Like if we had guidelines around how you could specify any stack, then at least we could shepherd people towards a norm more easily. I feel like at this point, it's like one RFC back in history, and it's only because we talk to each other that there's any overlap, right?
because now let's say I want to use some Red Hat images. I don't know what my stack ID should look like.
I'd love to specify like okay, maybe in the beginning we're worried about this, so we don't get rid of different stack IDs. But let's say you want to specify a UBI image. Like we should have a generic schema where if you say IO Buildpacks stacks and put other things after that, it means something. So you're like IO Buildpacks stacks, Linux, UBI 8, AMD 64. And like based on the places of all those identifiers, it means a particular thing, so that as people are expanding into different images, instead of inventing a bunch of new things and we have to corral all the compatibility later, it's obvious what they should put there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd rather have it be predictable. I feel like visible is better than what we have now, but predictable would it be even better? And then constrained is the best, but we could work there in increments.
I do wonder if, like, I have no idea what this would look like, but if there was a way to separate the idea of like labeling things, right? Like these mix-ins as something completely different than dependencies on the stack, right? I know like right now they're pretty much one of the same, but I wonder if there's a disservice done there, right? That we try to shoehorn this idea of a dependency that then other mechanisms try to leverage to use, as opposed to what people might ultimately want, which is a way to define these are the things that I'm really dependent on, right? And these are other additional arbitrary labels. Again, not a concrete idea, but I do wonder if maybe we're overloading mix-ins.
I do remember some of the pain points when we had some of our build pack developers try to target the generic stacks. It was like no one knows what what they rely on. Like it was basically just like just try and see what fails over and over again.
Add one package
until
at
you
a
finish
time
it.
until it
I mean,
succeeds.
it was unbelievably annoying. Like because everyone depends on CA certs, but no one realizes it. And then like every time you change it, you basically have to go through that process again, right? Because I mean, in our case, we've got folks who are writing just bash build scripts, and there's, these are carried over from a decade worth of work, and so like there's probably certain paths that rely on things that just no one even knows anymore. And so accurately describing a build pack and all of its dependencies was like basically possible. Now that I remember, at least one of them complaining, like a Ruby build pack that's like a decade old or something.
Yeah, see, because like I wonder if in that particular case, right, like if we had dependencies, let's talk specifically about packages, right? If we had a different mechanism for defining packages, and packages had a way that it constructed a dependency tree, right? So like that you depend on, let's say, Python, right? And Python depends on CA certs, right? I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other dependencies, right? But somehow that was encoded somewhere, somehow, right? And you could create this dependency tree, and then you could validate against the dependency tree. I think that
I feel
would
like it's
work
the
a lot
same
better.
problem though, because like right now, if you put a dependency on the OS Python package, like you don't need to put a CA cert one if in fact Python depends on CA certs, because then Python won't ever be there without CA certs. So it doesn't matter tracing down the tree. It's just like actually figuring out what packages you depend on is not a trivial exercise for everyone all the time.
And it's dynamic as well, right? Like just because your build pack might require, Python in this one situation, but maybe it doesn't in another. And so like there's no way to express that. And you don't really want to, like, if you're talking about making tiny images at some point, like the Go build pack might require like all this stuff, like in main Heroku stuff, but then like on a tiny image, maybe it gets away without doing it as long as you meet these certain requirements. So it's really hard to express that from like a build pack author perspective.
It's true.
I'm curious, is there an example somewhere of a build pack that has actually thoroughly specified its dependencies in mixins? I've never seen one. Like we talk about this like it's a really useful feature, but I've actually never seen a build pack list the mixins it depends on actually.
I think it's because there's no use out of it, right? Once you have stack packs and you have a way of providing mixins, build packs will then like to depend on them. But now currently there's no use by defining them apart from just metadata.
Yeah. All that can happen now is if you specify your mixins is that it might not run.
Exactly.
It doesn't
Only
get you
downsides,
anything.
no upsides. Like no one's
Yeah.
going to produce this better image for you by you having the mixins there. There's
Yeah.
no selection process. There's nothing.
One thing I've never tried is what happens if you reference okay, maybe I'm wrong. What happens if you have a meta build package that has multiple build packs that all have different stack IDs and mixin guarantees? And then what's the aggregate of that meta build pack?
Pack does something clever and like slurps it all up and finds the intersection. when it creates your meta build package, and then applies that as like the stack ID and mixin labels.
And if there is no intersection, it just fails.
I don't know the answer to that, but Javier's nodding,
think
so I
that's
guess
true.
yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
I mean, I could imagine a use case where you have some meta build packages where, let's say, they define multiple stack IDs. I want to use like 9 out of the 11 build packs included in that meta build pack, and I don't want to define the order or something again and again. There's currently no way to do that rather than just take all of them apart and then individually define a meta build pack with the correct order.
Yeah, if someone makes a huge meta build pack and one of those components has a dependency that doesn't work with your image, but you don't want to use that component anyways, you can't use that build pack and you have to redefine the whole order. There are other ways to solve that rather than at the stack. Like you might be able to say like, I want this less an optional build pack or something like that. But
It's even trickier, like we talked about with like the Ruby one. I believe there's like, do you list something like the Postgres like libraries? Because like most folks are running Postgres for Ruby, but not everybody. And so you don't want to like restrict stacks. Like if someone's using MySQL and like the Ruby build pack, you don't really want to, you don't want your build pack to say that it requires MySQL, because the build pack itself doesn't require Postgres or MySQL, but like most of the apps it builds do. And so that gets kind of awkward as well, like because you can't really, it's hard to express these very dynamic conditions. It's basically all there's to say.
I think like this is the main, like all the other ecosystems have a nice way of specifying dependencies which allows them to be reused, whereas build packs, I've seen it's very easy to proliferate them. So like if someone wants a new build pack or like a new build pack order, they have to create it rather than reuse some of the existing ones or parts of existing ones. So it's very hard to define atomic build packs and then aggregate them together in a way that others can use them, because in creating a build pack, no one thinks about how X person is going to use it in some other aggregation. They just think about their specific use case and their specific order or aggregation. So like when the
plan entry names are a big one, like build plan entries.
Yeah.
Like we could do something, do a lot more documentation on the Paketo side that would actually make it easier to reuse, but that's also basically just like a build pack author namespace where different build packs can use the same keys to mean different things. I feel like we left some of these contracts really loose, which has had some benefits. We can do cool things that weren't necessarily planned out exactly for us, but I feel like we've gone back and forth with this a lot, and Ben was a big proponent of keeping things loose. But I wonder if like tightening things up and introducing stronger distinctions between when something is supposed to be understood by everyone and when it's domain specific, so that things are more likely to be interoperable, could create a better ecosystem. Like maybe we could do the same thing for build plan that we do for mix-ins or project toml or something, where we actually go ahead as a project and define a bunch of keys that have specific meanings. And if you want your own key, just put a little namespace in front of it, but then things actually have a prayer of working when you start to combine them from different vendors.
I think this is where like some standards or guidelines would help where the spec would still keep it loose, but if you want maximal compatibility with this huge ecosystem out there, you can define your things or use things according to these guidelines. If you don't, fine, you can still do whatever you want, but then that means you'll have to do extra work. But currently it stops, like it doesn't stop people, but it makes it harder for people who do want to reuse things. And if there was some common convention that they could follow, which would allow them to reuse things better, that would be great.
Like if the thing you require in the build plan, if what you expect to come out of it is an executable to be on the path, like you should name it the name of the executable or something like that. Or maybe we'll say exec : the name of the executable, like just some, even if we don't define specific keys guidelines, so that there's a higher probability of things working. Doesn't work for all cases. Like if you wanted JRE, you want Java to be on the path, but maybe you want a JDK instead. So we talked about that one for a long time. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job facilitating this tightly. Javier shouldn't have entrusted me with the power. Should we move on to standard format for bomb security scanning?
So that was also something I put, which is along the same lines, which is we have like bomb which contains all this metadata, but the real usefulness there is being able to have some common tools that can parse it and then identify like information from it which we can act upon. Otherwise, it's just random metadata. So
you're picking all my favorite topics. These two topics are the two things that are giving me heartache these days. I feel like we should SPDX format instead of having our own standard bomb format is sort of the sentence people have been throwing around. I don't know enough about the format to know how much of a good idea it is, but I feel like if anybody has defined a standard that isn't just the one we made up, it'd be nice to use that instead to generate data in that format. And maybe we can have a place to aggregate things that don't fit, but if there are a couple known activities that people want to do, like gather OSL license information or create a bill of materials. But if we've formatted it uniquely, both in the overall structure of the bomb being something we made up, and then each build pack has too much freedom in what it puts in there, that it's not standard. You might have all of the information you need, but not in a way that's useful. Like you're so close to having everything you need, but you don't quite. It'd be really cool to generate either an additional layer that had some of this stuff in formats that people expect. Just providing more structure that way, I think would be really, really good.
I mean, and it doesn't have to be something enforced by the spec. It can just be a suggestion that, hey, maybe if you use this, you get some other benefits from these other tools or something like that. But currently, because it's a free-form field, that metadata table, you can just put anything there, and people will reinvent formats and then reinvent tools. And then when they try to connect it to some existing tools, they'll see, okay, no, my bomb is now not correct, then I have to write some like middle layer that converts my bomb to the format that this X tool expects. And then
you need a translation. You need a translation that understands what conventions each one of your build packs are following. Like if we had some reserved keys. And we're like, if you fill in license and you fill in these parts, we will do this thing for you or regenerate this format.
I mean, that doesn't have to be something that the lifecycle implements. It can just be something that the platform can do, where it knows this format. Like if you want to export your BOM as a certain format, you can do format equals something, and your platform knows how to export it to that format.
Mm-hmm. But we need enough structure that the platform could, right? And because people use different formats, like you might as well have at least the option to have some of these just as labels so that they don't get lost when the images move around. Let's do all these things. Do we want to talk about that more now, or should we move on to the next thing and like try to come back with a concrete proposal?
Yeah, you can come back to it later. I think we can investigate what existing standards, or like maybe we can do some research on what existing tools that offer these facilities, like what kind of formats they support, and see if there are like some candidates we can choose from.
Next on our list, intro video workshop.
Yeah, I added it. So I created a discussion a few weeks ago about creating a 1-minute video to introduce what Buildpacks are. There are many thoughts about what should be in this video since it's so short and it should be very clear. So after some discussion with some people around, we decided it will be great to have like a 1-hour workshop meeting, whatever you call it. I think it will be, at least the first meeting will be some brainstorming on what this intro video should include. I'll probably schedule it for next week on Tuesday. Once I know for sure the times, I'll also post it in the general channel so everyone can join. Yeah, that's it. Just wanted to say this.
Cool. That's a good idea. On. Patrick's even saying that someone else can pay for it, which would be great. Thanks for letting us know, Yo. Up next, supporting mono repos.
Hey, I mean, I think I saw some issues some time ago around this. I don't know what happened with it. I think it was an RFC that was closed or something. I can't find it. But how have others dealt with like mono repos and Buildpacks? So
In which sense? Like you're talking about like a project toml that's giving a subpath to push, or
so the easiest thing is that you have like a mono repo where the subpath is the project you want to build, right? And that's easy to do. The more difficult one is, let's say you have like different folders and each of them have to be acted upon by different build packs in the same build process. Or let's say you have dependencies in a different folder which you want to include in your build process, but you're building like something in the subdirectory. So these are the two cases I can think of where you have some top level dependencies in the same repository, but you're building a subdirectory. So there's no easy way to say that include this whole tree, but work in this, like do the build and detection process in some subdirectory.
I feel like at some point, the way we've treated it on Paketo is as a build pack concern, because there's just different patterns for doing this with different tools. So like maybe you're building a multi-module Java app where the root POM is at the root, but you're only building one of the modules. In some ways, the right way to do that is to pass the module name you want to build to the build pack, and it just builds that one. And then you also give it like a, or if there's a build process that builds multiple artifacts, you give it like a matcher so it can pull the right one out of the target directory. And I know other build packs like the Paketo Go build pack include a option where you can specify the package you want to pass to go build, stuff like that. I wonder if there isn't one generic framework solution for that, and it's more specific to the conventions of different tools, like what the best interface is, and you just give the whole repo to the build packs and then let them specify their conventions. That's how I've always thought about it.
So you could technically push the detection of, like, let's say you want to detect a particular build pack for a specific subfolder, you can do that by specifying a key so that the build pack looks at that key and then it runs its detection logic in that subfolder instead of at the top level directory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. Yeah. So this, I think, is another thing that I think would be a really good, like, convention, that you can say that common build packs should have some key where rather than running the detection process in the root folder or looking for files there, they should look at some key specific to that build pack and go run the detection process for those files there. Because then I can imagine multiple different build packs coming up with different ways of specifying this subdirectory that they should look into.
I wonder if that makes sense as like an extension spec, like an optional extension spec. I don't think we want to put like too much more onus on what it means to be a compliant build pack, but it still provides guidelines. The other thing would be like log level. Like I know you can change the log level of Paketo build packs, all of them except the same environment variable, but I'm sure we didn't pick the exact same one that other people did. So now you got to set 3 environment variables if you're using a set of build packs in a build that don't all have the same conventions. I wonder if there are other examples. Those seem like the 2 big ones.
I guess also the version numbers, I think that's also very common where you want to specify the dependency version, and I don't know if you can offer a consistent way of doing that, but I can imagine that.
It seems like each one of those kind of has to be different, right? Because it might be specifying a couple versions of different things in the same build. So each one of those build packs would be like, what version of Maven do you want? What version of Bellsoft Liberica do you want? What version of Go do you want? Are all kind of different rather than all the same.
Because now that you have users using this buildpacks. For using any specific buildpack, the user has to go and read the specific detection process of that buildpack in order to use it.
Mhm.
There's no convention they can think of that, okay, if I'm using buildpack X, if I specify like this variable, I know that for buildpack X, it will use this version, or it will use this log, or it will use this directory. You have to go and read the implementation of the detect step, or like whatever documentation, if they have provided one, to figure out how it runs detect. It's just a problem I've been facing in terms of trying to teach people what buildpacks, like how buildpacks would work in their projects, because now they have to learn a whole new way of specifying what things they want or how to get the buildpack to do what they want. So
I
there,
agree with the goal there, but I despair that you could come up with a consistent interface for all the most important things other than the really easy ones like path and log level. But I wonder if there's a different way to approach it where you could sort of make these images self-documented. Like I know on the Paketo side, we've tried within the tools we have available to us. So like whenever, like in detect, most of the time you don't get output unless it's verbose and
Yeah.
nothing detected and something went wrong. So our place to write output, if we want to give users hints for things, is build. So when the Paketo build packs build, before they do anything, they just like print their configuration options and default values just to give people a hint about what they could do with the build pack. But in some ways it's limited because you need to have already gotten to the place where it detected correctly to even see that, right? But all that information is coming from fields in Buildpack TOML that could be put into a label that contained all the Buildpack metadata. If there was some standard format for that, then you could, pack document Buildpack and it could just print out what all the options are, stuff like that.
yes, that makes sense. So you could have like a documentation or detection field for in the buildpack TOML where pack the buildpack name minus help just prints that out. So
Yeah. Like we already kind of do that on our side, but just for ourselves. But if there was a shared way to do it, then you could be like, oh, here are the environment variables, and here's the stack ID, and here's the detection criteria. And if you just put all the information in the right place, then you could get a tool to make a pretty output for you.
yeah, that would be really nice, and it could be as simple as just specifying a documentation field for each buildpack, which pack prints out when you run buildpack help with the name of the buildpack or something like that.
I like the idea of making it a little bit more structured so that pack can make a really pretty output for a CLI, but you could also, like the Buildpack registry could eventually make pretty web pages that display the same thing.
That would be great. Like so in terms of structure, I guess you could say documentation, you could say like these are the environment variables I use and this is their meaning, or these are the files that I use.
Mm-hmm.
I guess files and environment variables are the only two ways to specify things, right?
Yeah. You could also say like, here are the build plan entries I provide or require. Here are the names of the keys I'll put in the BOM. But if we fix that format, maybe you wouldn't need to. All right, I think we're at time. I know I gotta run. This was a great discussion. I accidentally checked off everything in the entire document. Undo. I just wanted to check off the things we talked about. um, There are a lot of big ideas here, and I think all of them would be really valuable. It's hard to think about how to make progress on them with all of the other stuff in flight. But I'm glad we're talking about it. I wonder like which of these we want to approach first. Might be a conversation we could have later.
Yeah, I do wonder if the first step, right? Like I know typically we're like, oh, create an RFC, but I do wonder if at least starting a discussion on the discussion board would be a good place to start, or an issue on the RFC repo, right? But at least somewhere we could track
The
the
fact that we
the
want to do
ideas.
things like this. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. I gotta run.
All right.
Have
See
a good
you.
one.